If you've ever watched more than 5 minutes of a Rick and Morty episode, you probably figured out pretty quickly that it's not exactly kid-friendly. Pushing boundaries is one of the many things Rick Sanchez is really good at. But today, we're going to talk about some of the moments when the show got a little bit too adult and definitely crossed the line. See if you ever stop to consider the ramifications of these moments from Rick and Morty. In the Rick and Morty episode Meeseeks and Destroy, Morty decides to take the lead on their adventure in order to make it a safer and less traumatizing experience. In fact, pretty much everything that Morty experiences on his adventure is pretty traumatizing, including when he and Rick inadvertently caused the demise of an actual giant. They did so when they had broken into his house to steal his treasure, which really puts the classic Jack and the Beanstalk story in a different perspective. Facing regular prison is pretty horrifying, but facing giant prison is way worse. While Rick and Morty are in the courtroom for their trial, Rick remarks that they'll have to be careful not to drop the soap. That's a pretty standard quip about spending time in prison, but then of course Rick has to make things explicit by stating exactly why it's so inadvisable. The world of dating is often complicated for adults to navigate, never mind young kids Morty's age. In the episode Rick Potion number 9, Morty is infatuated with the girl from his school named Jessica, who isn't particularly interested in his existence. So Morty solicits help from his grandfather Rick, and it goes about as well as you might think when Rick creates a love potion for Morty to give to Jessica. The moral ramifications of using a substance to manipulate the emotions of someone are actually pretty dark, and to make matters worse, the potion ends up working too well. We would say that Jessica tries to flirt with Morty at the dance, but it's a little bit more, graphic than that. She engages in behavior that's definitely not acceptable for a school dance, and thanks to her case of the flu interacting with the potion, things get pretty weird and terrifying pretty quickly. Being a parent is tough, especially when your father/father-in-law is a brilliant alcoholic scientist intent on taking your children on dangerous adventures. But in the episode Raising Gazorpazorp, Morty got the opportunity to become a parent and learned it's not as easy as it looks. But we're not going to talk about the fact that Morty chose to raise a homicidal monster. We're going to talk about how the monster came to be in the first place. We won't spell out everything about the birds and the bees for you, especially since neither of those animals were involved here. Instead, it's the story of a young boy and his, relationship with a humanoid robot. Let's just say the two of them are more than friends, and their relationship ends up producing a creature containing half of Morty's DNA. Speaking of how hard it is to be a parent, we have the pilot episode of Rick and Morty. Going on adventures with Rick might not be all fun and games, but it's still something Morty loves doing. Well, usually. But when it starts to interfere with his schoolwork and causes him to not get enough sleep, his parents understandably grow concerned. Not only does he fall asleep at the breakfast table, but he also dozes off while he's in class with his math teacher, Mr. Goldenfold. Kids nodding off in class is nothing new, but Morty sinks into a rather intense dream featuring his crush, Jessica. While he's asleep, he makes grabbing motions with his hands and inadvertently ends up groping Mr. Goldenfold, who, well, doesn't put a stop to it, although he declares he will in 5 more minutes. Yikes. The Rick and Morty episode Lawnmower Dog features a version of notorious horror movie monster Freddy Krueger called Scary Terry. But the remarkable thing about this episode is that Scary Terry isn't even the most messed up part of it, and he has knives on his fingers. Rick and Morty decide to travel into the dreams of Mr. Goldenfold in order to convince him to give Morty less math homework so that he can spend more time adventuring with Rick. It probably would have been a lot simpler for Rick to just do Morty's homework for him, but we digress. Rick and Morty end up in Mr. Goldenfold's dreams, where things are pretty darn freaky. Most upsetting of all is that there's a version of Morty's sister Summer in the dream, and seeing how a teacher views one of his young students is pretty disturbing. Some people feel the Christmas season should be about charity and helping others, but instead of helping the homeless, Rick lures a homeless man back to his garage and creates a theme park inside of him in the episode Anatomy Park. As you can probably guess, the plan has more than a few flaws, namely the fact that poor Ruben isn't long for the world, and we don't imagine having a theme park constructed inside him helps any. When Ruben perishes, Morty and the other park guests have to make a hasty retreat. At one point, Rick uses his technology to hit Ruben with a growth ray, which ultimately results in Morty being rescued, but not before a grown man wearing a Santa hat traumatizes pretty much everyone else. And we won't even talk about what part of Ruben's anatomy park was responsible for destroying a mountain range. Remember what we said about the episode Meeseeks and Destroy? Yeah, it's a total horror show from start to finish, but there's definitely one part that stands out among the rest in terms of being traumatizing for both Morty and the audience. When Rick and Morty stop at the Thirsty Step, Morty goes to freshen up in the bathroom and ends up encountering a creature who introduces himself as Mr. Jellybean. Aw, doesn't he look harmless? Well, he's not, because he brutally attacks Morty in a bathroom stall and Morty is forced to fight back violently in order to escape. This scene was definitely disturbing, and the implications get even worse after Rick takes out Jellybean, who is revealed to have been the king of a poor village. During Rick Potion number 9, things go from bad to worse when Rick's love potion spreads thanks to a stubborn flu virus. Sometimes it seems like there isn't anything Rick can't solve with a portal gun and some quick thinking, but in this episode, he goes way too far. The more he tries to create an antidote, the more grotesque everyone affected by the potion becomes. Soon, the world is filled with terrifying Cronenberg monsters, and even Rick realizes it's beyond repair. But thankfully, the Rick and Morty universe is apparently a multiverse, because the eponymous characters simply hop over to another timeline. In this reality, Rick and Morty meet their end thanks to an experiment gone wrong, and the Rick and Morty from the Cronenberg timeline simply take their places. Oh, but not before they have to bury their own bodies in the backyard. Yeah, that's not going to leave any serious mental or emotional scars on Morty or anything. While Beth and Jerry are on their less than romantic vacation in Rixie business, Rick and Summer decide to throw a party back at the house, much to Morty's dismay. While Summer invites kids from her school, Rick invites a surprising array of alien creatures, including an old friend of his named Squanchy. He uses the word squanch to refer to various things, kind of like how the Smurfs use the word smurf. Rick tells his friends to make themselves at home, and let's just say Squanchy takes that way too literally. When Morty and Jessica stumble upon him later, he's engaged in a rather graphic act. He may have referred to the act as squanching, but we know what was really going on. Everyone knows that a purge is when all rules go out the window completely for 24 hours, which pretty much means people can do anything they want with no real consequences. In Look Who's Purging Now, Rick and Morty are looking for some windshield washer fluid when they visit a planet in the throes of its annual purge. At first, Morty wants to save a girl named Arthricia, but she later turns on him and Rick. After dealing with this situation for quite some time, Morty just totally snaps and, well, gets into the spirit of the purge. He even tries to destroy Arthricia after she betrays him in order to seek vengeance on the wealthy people who forced the peasants to fight during the purge. While Morty is mortified by the violent rage he was consumed with, Rick explains it away by blaming a candy containing pergonal, which amplifies violent tendencies. Of course, we later learned the candy was pergonal-free, and Morty really does have incredibly violent tendencies and should probably get some professional help. Everyone has their own hobbies and interests, and one of Jerry's is the Titanic. In the episode Rixie Business, Jerry and Beth visit the Titanic too, which promises to recreate the experience of being on the Titanic, complete with crashing into an iceberg and sinking. Beth is less than impressed with the whole thing and pawns Jerry off on Lucy, a maid working aboard the ship. At first, things go well, but then Lucy becomes determined to recreate the famous car scene from the movie Titanic. Yikes. And when Jerry resists, she threatens him with a weapon and tries to force him into the car anyway. Yikes again. It's like Morty and the Jellybean King all over again, but thankfully this time, Beth is there to rescue Jerry. Censorship is a funny thing, especially when it comes to animated shows like Rick and Morty. In general, these shows can get away with things that live-action shows simply can't, but there are still some things which need to be edited out. Usually, obscenities are one of them, but not in the song Get Schwifty, which was featured in the episode of the same name. When Cromulons descend on Earth, causing chaos and demanding to be entertained, things are dire when they cause the demise of most of Earth's famous musicians. Thankfully, Ice-T survives and teams up with Rick and Morty to create a song designed to delight the Cromulons and get them to leave Earth. The song Get Schwifty is, well, it's pretty simple and admittedly catchy, but it advocates performing a certain action on the floor, which we just can't condone. More often than not, Rick is portrayed as being the crazy one in the family, while his daughter Beth lives a relatively normal life. But in the episode The ABCs of Beth, we learn that Beth's mind is also a strange and occasionally horrible place. When Beth was a kid, she would play in an imaginary world with her friend Thomas Lipkip, but of course it gets revealed that the imaginary world was real and created by Rick to entertain Beth. When she realizes Tommy could still be trapped in Froopy Land, she and Rick go to rescue him, and what they find is pretty darn horrifying. Tommy is indeed still in Froopy Land, where he's made both friends, food, and more than that with the inhabitants. Yikes for the third time. Even the Lannisters don't eat each other afterward. In the episode The Ricks Must Be Crazy, Summer, Morty, and Rick all go to see a ball fondlers movie together, which is definitely less than a wholesome family flick. Oh, and when Summer's left alone in the ship, it goes through pretty dark and horrifying lengths in order to protect her from perceived harm. In the episode Autoerotic Assimilation, Rick reunites with his old girlfriend, a hive mind named Unity. She explains that she took over a planet, giving the inhabitants a higher quality of life in exchange for their free will. But Rick only cares about getting back together with Unity and consummating their union, which frankly gets really strange. Unity leaves Rick a heartbreaking letter, claiming that the two are simply bad influences on each other and should stay apart. Instead of crying or eating too much ice cream, Rick designs a terrifying contraption designed to take his own life and even tests it on a helpless little Cronenberg-like monster. Rick passes out before he can use the machine on himself, but it's still pretty horrifying. Squatchy isn't the only alien who comes to town for the party Rick throws during the episode Ricksy Business. Apparently, during his many years of life, Rick made the acquaintance of some Traflorkians. These small green creatures love to goof around, and Rick uses a very casual and offensive term to refer to them. Of course, Rick explains this and also loudly greets the Traflorkians by shouting, "What's up, my glibglops?" In the episode Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate, Jerry becomes ill after indulging in some ice cream Rick was using to develop a dangerous mutant bacteria. He's rushed to St. Gloopy Noop's hospital in outer space. While Jerry is healed, he's also asked to donate a rather sensitive and important part of his body to Shrimply Pibbles, an important alien civil rights leader. It's definitely an awkward situation, which is made even more so when Jerry decides to donate his body part by force while brandishing a weapon which has all kinds of creepy implications. In theory, an alien arcade sounds really awesome, but when Rick and Morty end up spending time at Blips and Chips, Morty plays a game which is incredibly depressing. He decides to play the game Roy, A Life Welllived, which is an extreme virtual reality simulator where Morty controls a man named Roy. He lives out Roy's whole life, which includes him losing his chance to live his dream, contracting cancer, and living a quiet and unexciting life as a carpet store employee. The whole thing is really sad, and Morty understandably has a difficult time reconciling the fact that it was all a game. Of course, Rick makes fun of Morty's in-game decisions and decides to take his version of Roy totally off the rails. In the episode Lawnmower Dog, Rick designs a helmet designed to make the family pet, Snuffles, smarter. This soon gets out of hand as Snuffles becomes too smart, empowering other dogs and calling himself Snowball because his fur is so fluffy and white. Snowball and his canine companions quickly enslave the humans, which is pretty darn unsettling. He also confronts Summer about the aftermath of the family's decision to neuter him, which is just awkward. In the episode Total Recall, the family fights against an invasion of parasites who imitate a variety of different creatures and plague the family with false memories. Some of these memories are happy and simple, featuring characters like Cousin Nicky and Mr. Beauregard, but then we learn about a character named Sleepy Gary, and his story is pretty unsettling and involves him being married to Beth while having an affair with Jerry. Jerry's feelings are so strong, he begins to think he isn't real, and when Sleeping Gary disappears, he says he needs time to mourn his loss. We know one of the reasons we love Rick and Morty so much is because it's always barreling right over the line of good taste. Take to the comments section and tell us your favorite time this great show went too far. Then make sure to hit the subscribe button for more videos from CBR. Bye for now.